Well, hey there, friends. I'm your host, Penny, and this is Criminally Nerdy. Welcome back! Oh my gosh, it has been so long. Did you miss me? I missed you more. Before we dive in, I just wanted to give a quick thanks to those who listened to part one, and thanks for those who are already interested in the Pride merch. Like I said, hopefully next year I'll be able to do a bit more. For now, shoot me those addresses, and when the stickers come in, I'll happily get one to you. Or, again, if you're attending the Indie Pride Festival on Saturday, June 8th, track down myself or someone wearing a criminally nerdy Pride shirt and we'll get you taken care of. This episode is airing on March 14th, which is National Bond with Your Dog Day and National Decency Day. Be a decent human. Call into work and bond with your dog, or your neighbor's dog, or a dog you see on the street, as long as their owners say it's okay. There is nothing better than snuggling with a pupper, so I can assure you, your boss won't even question it. You're welcome. If you haven't listened to part one, you might want to go do that now. You're probably going to want to know who we're dealing with and how we got here. Yesterday, we covered Charles Manson's early life and crimes, the formation of his family, cult, and how, in an effort to instigate a race war, which Manson referred to as helter-skelter, he instructed his followers to move away from petty crimes and into full-blown violence. I'm going to put another blanket warning over this episode. We are going to be talking about the crescendo and finale of the Manson family reign of terror. The details of these crimes are very upsetting, so maybe don't listen with your kids in the car or in your office without headphones. Not that I've ever made those mistakes. We left off with Bobby Beausoleil being arrested for the murder of Greg Hinman and the Manson family deciding on their next move. They land on committing a copycat crime to bolster Bobby's claims that he simply fled in Greg's car after seeing him get murdered by two black men. Selling this story, in Charlie's mind, is instrumental in not only freeing Bobby, but in starting Helter Skelter. It took no time for Manson to decide where he wanted to start. After his dreams of being a musician crashed and burned, Manson decided to take his rage out on one very specific place. 10050 Cielo Drive was not only a symbol to him of what could have been, but of the establishment that had rejected him. He had faced rejection in one way or another since the day he was born, and the home in Beverly Hills is where he would have his revenge. Just 3 days after Beausoleil's arrest, on August 9, 1969, Manson sent his four most loyal followers, Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian, to go to the address and instructed them to totally destroy everyone in it. He told them to, quote, leave a sign, make it something witchy. They had all taken various drugs, including speed, LSD, and belladonna. And how are you functioning on all of that? I don't know, maybe they had built up a tolerance, but I just can't imagine you're firing on all cylinders with that stuff running through your system. The home Manson had sent his followers to is where he had met Terry Melcher, a music producer who had declined to give Charlie a record deal. But Terry didn't live in the home anymore, and Manson knew that. He didn't know who lived there, but he knew that his revenge wouldn't be exacted on Melcher. What he did know was that whoever was living there had to be rich and high profile. This is exactly what he needed to get the world's attention. The home was being rented by 35-year-old Roman Polanski and his wife 25-year-old Sharon Tate. Roman had survived unimaginable horrors from being a young boy in Poland during World War II, including seeing his father taken away by German soldiers right in front of his very eyes, and learning that his 4-month pregnant mother died in a gas chamber in Auschwitz. He was eventually reunited with his father, and as he became older, he got interested in filmmaking. He made a few films before he had his big break directing Rosemary's Baby. The blockbuster film put him on the map. Sharon Tate was an actress and model. Her first major role was in the movie Valley of the Dolls. She was a rising star when she met Polanski while filming The Fearless Vampire Killers. The two fell in love and got married in January of 1968. They were the definition of a Hollywood power couple. Sharon and Roman were absolutely over the moon when they found out Sharon was pregnant. In August of 1969, while Roman was finishing up filming a movie in Europe, 8.5-month pregnant Sharon was busy preparing their new home for the arrival of their son. She took a break from nesting one night and invited some friends over. Wojtek Frykowski, his girlfriend Abigail Folger, who is a social worker and the heiress to the Folgers coffee fortune, and Jay Sebring joined Sharon for what was supposed to be a night of fun at 10050 Cielo Drive. The property also had a guest cottage where caretaker William Garrison stayed. 18-year-old Steve Parent had come by to sell him a clock radio, trying to make some extra money for college. Garrison didn't end up buying the clock, but offered Steve a beer for taking the time to bring it out. The two hung out for a bit, and Steve left around 12:15 in the morning. He got in his car to head home, not knowing that as he was leaving, another group was arriving. The Manson family were caught off guard by the headlights. Tex waved the car down, and as soon as Steve stopped, Tex pulled a gun. Steve panicked and told him he wouldn't say anything, he just wanted to leave. But Tex didn't give him the opportunity. He shot Steve 4 times with no hesitation. He forced a very reluctant Linda to steal the man's wallet. Tex then instructed Linda to go to the back of the house and act as a lookout while he, Susan, and Patricia made their way to the front of the house. They were all armed with knives, and Tex used his to cut a slit in the screen door. Frykowski awoke to the intruders and asked what they wanted. Tex told him that he was the devil and he was there to do the devil's business before kicking him in the head. Tex sent Susan and Patricia to search the rest of the house. They found Sharon Tate, Abigail Folger, and Jay Sebring in the bedrooms. They ordered everyone into the living room and huddled them into the center. Tex took a rope and looped it around all of the necks. He then threw the other end of the rope over a beam in the ceiling. He pulled tight until all 4 victims were bound together. They all stayed silent and were cooperative in the hopes that these lunatics were just there to rob them and would leave once they had gotten something of value. Their hopes were dashed when Tex shouted, "You are all going to die." They began to panic, and Sharon screamed so loud that Linda was able to hear her outside. With Sharon crying, her protective friend Jay shouted at the intruders, "Can't you see that she's pregnant?" As soon as he spoke up, Tex shot him in the stomach. Tex demanded all of the money they had. Abigail offered the $70 she had on her, which is $605 in today's money. I mean, take the money and run. I'm sure that would buy you a decent amount of meth or LSD or whatever. I didn't look it up because, again, I don't need any more federal agencies than I probably already have monitoring my searches. Tate said that she didn't have any money on her, but that she could go get some. Jay was still alive after being shot in the stomach, but was writhing around on the ground. Tex went over to him and stabbed him to death in front of the others. In addition to being shot, his autopsy revealed that he had been stabbed 7 times. With adrenaline pumping, Frykowski struggled to get away. Susan Atkins stabbed at his legs and Tex shot at him, but he was able to get free. He made it outside and limped right past Linda Kasabian. She stared at him knowing what she was supposed to do, but couldn't bring herself to do it. Unfortunately, he didn't get far. Tex ran out after him, beat him in the head with the butt of his gun so viciously that it bent the barrel and broke off the side of the gun grip. He then stabbed him repeatedly. His autopsy showed that he was stabbed a total of 51 times. Abigail Folger had escaped in the commotion, but Patricia ran after her. When she caught up to Abigail, she stabbed the young woman to death. Tex had made his way over and also stabbed Abigail. When police found her, she was covered in so much blood that they thought she was wearing a red nightgown. She wasn't. Abigail had gone to bed in a white nightgown. Her autopsy revealed that she had been stabbed 28 times. After he was sure she was dead, Tex told Patricia that they also needed to kill whoever was in the guest house. However, Patricia was a little shaken from killing Abigail, so she only pretended to check the guest house and told Tex that it was empty. Susan, Patricia, and Tex then went back inside to Sharon Tate. She pleaded with them for the life of her baby. She even begged them to just kidnap her long enough so that she could give birth. Susan told her, quote, "I don't care about you. I don't care if you're going to have a baby. You had better be ready. You're going to die, and I don't feel anything about it." Tex and Susan then stabbed her multiple times, including right in her pregnant belly. As she lay dying, Tate cried out for her mother. They then carved an X in her stomach. The final act in their brutal attack was hanging her from a ceiling beam. Her autopsy revealed that she had been stabbed 16 times, and though her cause of death was massive hemorrhage from the stab wounds, she was still alive when they strung her up. Susan took a towel, soaked it in Sharon Tate's blood, and wrote the word pig on the front door, attempting to make it look like the Hinman scene. This was also her interpretation of Manson's instruction to do something witchy. That isn't witchy at all. That is insulting to the word witchy. They returned to the car, and Linda later said that it was very clear Tex was angry with her for not participating. They drove about 1.5 miles up the road before stopping at a house to use a hose to wash off the blood. The homeowner came out with a flashlight to see what the commotion was, and they took off. Not much further up the road, they pulled off to the side of the road and just tossed the clothes they were wearing into a patch of grass on the side of the road. Criminal masterminds, I tell ya. They stopped one more time and tossed the gun into what they thought was an empty canyon. What they couldn't see from the road was that it was not an empty canyon. At the bottom of the hill was a neighborhood where the gun landed in someone's backyard and was later discovered by a 10-year-old boy. On the drive back to the ranch, Patricia kept complaining about how her hand was hurting from how hard she had stabbed the victims. Just fuck all the way off. All the way. When they returned, Manson was waiting. He asked if any of them had remorse, to which they all said no. Manson returned to the crime scene himself. He placed a towel over Jay Sebring's head, placed an American flag on the couch next to Tate's body, and left a random pair of glasses in an effort to confuse the police? Because a pair of glasses is what's going to shock them, not the brutally murdered bodies of 4 people. He cleaned up the scene, making sure there was no evidence left behind. The next day, the Polanski's housekeeper arrived and found the bodies. She immediately called the police, and the murders made national news. It was only when they saw the coverage that the Manson family realized who they had murdered. Linda said that she did not know there was a pregnant woman inside, and when she found this out, she was horrified to the point where she considered going for help. She said the only thing that stopped her was that she feared Manson or one of his followers would find out and kill her and her daughter. Police had arrested Garrison, the caretaker, who had only survived the attacks because Patricia hadn't checked the guest house like she was instructed to do. He was cleared quickly by passing a polygraph, but was unfortunately unable to help in the investigation because he was asleep, so he hadn't seen or heard anything. Manson was upset that not only were the Black Panthers not being blamed for this, but that they weren't linking the murders on Cielo Drive to Gary Hinman's murder. This would not only not clear Bobby Beausoleil, but it would not start Helter Skelter. Manson decided that the only way to go forward was more murder, naturally. The next night, August 10th, 1969, Manson decided to go with his followers to oversee their work. No one likes a micromanager, Charlie. He also brought with them Leslie Van Houten and Steve Clem Grogan. The 7 people piled into the car armed with knives and drove to Los Feliz. They turned on to Waverly Drive, where they had partied with some of the music industry connections that Manson had made through Dennis Wilson. Waverly Drive, like Cielo Drive, was something Manson viewed as part of an establishment that he couldn't break into. He knew that if one of the wealthy people who lived here died, it would be newsworthy. They chose the house next to the one where they had partied the year before, and Manson entered through an unlocked back door. Inside, he and Tex found Lino and Rosemary LaBianca, owners of a successful grocery store and boutique. They had absolutely no connection to Manson. Lino was asleep on the couch. He awoke to the intruders, and Manson held him at gunpoint while Tex tied him up. Manson asked if anyone else was in the home. Lino said yes, his wife was sleeping in the bedroom. Manson brought Rosemary out and set her next to her husband. Though scared, the two remained calm and cooperated, likely, again, thinking these people were just there to rob them and they would leave once they got what they came for. It was at this point that Manson stole Rosemary's wallet and left. He sent Leslie and Patricia inside. He told Tex to, quote, make sure everyone did something, and instructed them to head back to the ranch when they were done. He got in the car with Linda, Susan, and Clem and drove to a gas station in Sylmar, which had a predominantly African-American population. Manson instructed Linda to leave Rosemary's wallet in the restroom. His plan was for a black woman to steal the wallet, use Rosemary's credit cards, and be blamed for the whole thing. While Linda was hiding Rosemary's wallet, Charlie walked next door to Denny's and returned with 4 milkshakes. What? I love me a good milkshake, but come on, dude, that is some next level psycho shit. Back at the LaBianca house, a horrific scene was unfolding. They had placed pillowcases over the couple's heads and wrapped lamp cords around their necks to secure the pillowcases. Tex then told Patricia and Leslie to take Rosemary to the bedroom. After the girls took Rosemary away, Tex began stabbing Lino. Rosemary could hear her husband screaming and tried to get with him. She fought her attackers off with the very lamp they had used the cord of to tie her up with. Patricia stabbed her with a kitchen knife. Tex heard the scuffle and came rushing in. He, Susan, and Patricia all stabbed her repeatedly, even after she was clearly dead. Her autopsy revealed that she had been stabbed 41 times. Lino was stabbed more than a dozen times. Tex carved the word war into his stomach, while Patricia lodged a kitchen knife into his throat and a serving fork into his stomach. Similar to the Hinman and Cielo Drive scenes, they used Lino's blood to write the words "Rise" and "Death to Pigs" on the walls. In the kitchen, Patricia wrote "Helter Skelter" on the refrigerator door, but this dumb bitch misspelled it. It was like "Helter Skelter." This phrase was written all over the ranch. They were obsessed with it, and she still fucked it up. Look, I'm gonna be really mad if someone murders me. Really mad. Murder isn't cool. Don't do it. But if you murder me and then leave a misspelled word in my home, oh, honey, I am haunting the ever-living shit out of you. The killers then showered and ate the LaBianca's food before hitchhiking back to Spawn Ranch. The LaBiancas were found the next day by their son, who had returned home from a camping trip. Meanwhile, after milkshaking it up, Manson asked the followers who they should kill next. He remembered Linda meeting an actor recently and asked if she could remember where he lived. He needed as many high-profile deaths as possible to ignite Helter Skelter. Linda said yes, she did remember where actor Saladin Nader lived. They drove to his apartment, where Manson dropped Linda, Susan, and Clem off. He handed Linda a knife and told her that she was to slit his throat. He gave this instruction specifically to Linda because of her hesitance in the murders the night before. But Linda couldn't do it. She purposefully walked past Nader's apartment and knocked on the door next to his. An older man opened the door, and Linda apologized to him, saying she had the wrong place. She told the others she couldn't remember which one was the right apartment, so the three returned to the ranch. When news of the LaBianca murders broke, LA was in turmoil. Overnight, the sale of guard dogs and guns rose dramatically. The brutality, the random nature of it all, and the lack of any notable motivation struck fear into the public. Manson was sure this was finally the beginning of Helter Skelter. He sat back and waited for news of the riots. The news never came, though. In fact, police still hadn't linked all of the murders together. They thought the subsequent murders were copycat crimes. The idea of a serial killer wasn't even a thing at this time. In fact, the term serial homicide wasn't used until 1974. However, within a couple of weeks, the police were looking into the Manson family. But it wasn't for the murders. It was for car theft. The ranch was raided and several, including Charlie, were arrested. But they ended up skating by with no charges. Want to know why? Because someone wrote the wrong date on the search warrant. They got off on a technicality. Still, though, Manson was spooked. He was super paranoid and blamed 35-year-old Donald Shorty Shea for snitching. Shorty was an employee of the ranch owner and didn't like Charles or the members of the Manson family. He had actually told his boss that he should kick them out on several occasions. On August 26, 1969, Manson, Tex, Clem, and another follower, Bruce Davis, took Shea for a ride to a nearby car parts yard. Once they arrived, Shea was hit over the head with a pipe, tortured for information, and eventually stabbed to death. His body was not found until December of 1977. After Shea's murder, Manson moved the family to the Barker Ranch in Death Valley. It was here where they went on daily excursions to find the pit, which Manson said would be caves they would find in the desert. This is where they would hide out during Helter Skelter. Once it was over, they would emerge unscathed and rule the world. Barker Ranch wasn't exactly a step up from their previous accommodations. It was a rustic, bare-bones setup with only a few old cabins. Not to mention, they were still broke. They were stealing whatever they could get their hands on to make ends meet. Locals pretty much immediately connected the rash of recent thefts to the cult that had moved in and reported them to police. With these reports and the family still stealing cars, the Park Service, Highway Patrol, and Inyo County Sheriff's Department raided Barker Ranch. They seized cars, drugs, and weapons. They made multiple arrests, but Manson wasn't among them because he happened to be in LA visiting a friend. It wasn't until authorities returned a few days later and Officer James Purcell happened to notice that though the ranch appeared to be abandoned, there was a lit candle in one of the cabins. He searched the cabins, and as he reached the bathroom, he almost turned around to leave, but happened to notice some strands of hair poking out from a small cabinet. This is where Officer Purcell found Charles Manson. Like, that gives me shivers. Just put yourself in the situation. You're in a rickety little cabin in the middle of nowhere. It appears abandoned. It is pitch black outside. The only light you have is from one flickering candle. And you walk into the bathroom and this creepy bastard comes crawling out from under a little bathroom sink. That would give me nightmares for the rest of my life. Manson was arrested and brought to the Inyo County Jail with the rest of the family. It didn't take long for investigators to realize they were not just dealing with thieves. Susan Atkins had bragged to cellmates about the Tate LaBianca murders, and this wasn't the first time she'd opened her mouth. Kitty Lutzinger, Bobby Boussalet's girlfriend, had said that Susan had boasted and even laughed about torturing and killing Gary Hinman. Police were tying everything together now. Fingerprint and other physical evidence linked Tex, Leslie, and Patricia to the Tate LaBianca murders. Guess Charlie didn't clean up that evidence as well as he thought. Members of the family were either confessing or giving each other up left and right. Most notably was Linda Kasabian, who agreed to testify against the family in exchange for immunity. A media circus ensued. Susan Atkins, Leslie Van Houten, and Patricia Krenwinkel were dubbed the Manson Girls. The members of the family who were not arrested produced and released an album of Charlie's music in an effort to raise money for Manson's defense. To this day, Manson's music has received millions of downloads on streaming devices. I took a hard pass on checking that out. On June 15, 1970, the trials began. Manson originally acted as his own attorney, which is always a smart move. The judge eventually revoked his right to act as his own attorney because of his conduct. He violated gag orders and wasted the court's time with nonsensical pretrial motions. On his first day of trial, not being able to act as his own attorney, Manson arrived at the court with an X on his forehead that he had carved into himself. He said it was a symbol saying that he had X'd himself from the world. The following Monday, Susan, Patricia, and Leslie arrived at the court with X's on their foreheads too. They weren't the only ones. Many of the Manson family members were holding vigil at the courthouse and appeared with X's on their foreheads. They were a constant nuisance. They would walk around with hunting knives in plain view, which were legally carried but were seen as threatening. They weren't just vaguely threatening, they were upfront about it. They wanted to silence anyone who would speak against Manson. Former family members Juan Flynn and Paul Watkins were both told to keep their mouths shut. Paul was actually badly burned in a suspicious fire. Another former family member, Barbara Hoyt, was served what was meant to be a lethal dose of LSD in a hamburger by loyal follower Ruth Ann Morehouse. She survived the attempt, and though she was originally hesitant about testifying, she was now absolute that she was going to take the stand and tell the truth. Susan's testimony was inadvertently damning. She thought that she was defending Manson, but she had actually implicated him. Leslie Van Houten's attorney refused to let her take the stand in Manson's defense. Though he had already been denied the right to act as his own attorney, on October 5th, Manson was denied permission to cross-examine a witness, which makes sense. But Manson was blinded by rage, so he jumped over a table and tried to attack the judge. As he was wrestled to the ground, the female defendants began chanting in Latin. Really? Okay, Omen. After this, the judge began wearing a revolver under his robe. And I haven't really said anything about this thus far, but Charles Manson was not a big guy at all. He was 5'4" and slender. You have to be a special level of crazy for someone to go from, "aw, little guy," to, you know what, you're such a menace that I'm going to carry a gun in my own courtroom where I have actual armed guards to make me feel safer in your presence. Throughout the trial and his own testimony, Manson denied any responsibility for the murders. He said, quote, "The music is telling the youth to rise up against the establishment. Why blame it on me? I didn't write the music. I'm all for fighting the establishment, but murdering innocent people? That's not the way, bro." Somehow, he made enough of a case to the jury that they requested a record player and the White Album so that they could listen to it to see if they could decipher any hidden messages. This does speak to his powers of persuasion, though. Do you know how convincing someone has to be to get 12 adults who are being presented with evidence in a murder trial where people have admitted to committing the crimes and admitted that they did them at your command, but you say, "It's the music, not me," and all 12 of these adults are like, "Maybe." Persuasive or not, on March 29, 1971, the jury convicted Manson and his followers. They were all originally sentenced to death, but their sentences were commuted to life in prison in 1972 when California abolished the death penalty. This meant that there was a possibility they could eventually be paroled. The Manson family were suspected in several other murders. Manson once told a cellmate that he was responsible for at least 35. Deborah Tate, Sharon Tate's younger sister, who Manson taunted in later years, states that she thinks the trials only scratched the surface. Some of the potential victims are Darwin Morrell Scott, 64 years old. He was the brother of Manson's biological father. On May 27, 1969, he was found stabbed to death in his kitchen in Ashland, Kentucky. He had a total of 19 stab wounds and was actually pinned to the floor with a butcher knife. People remember seeing a man who matched Manson's description using the alias of Preacher in the area at the time of the murder. Though Manson was on parole in California at the time, meaning he was not allowed to leave the state without permission, the murder took place at a time when Manson was conveniently out of touch with his parole officer. But there's no way, right? Because Manson has never, ever violated his parole. John Philip Hott, 22 years old. He had moved to California from Ohio in the summer of 1969. He joined the Manson family and was one of those arrested in the car theft raid. Manson, however, suspected him of being an informant. On November 5, 1969, he was hanging out with some of the members of the Manson family. Someone found a gun and decided they should play Russian roulette. Nothing ever goes wrong when you play Russian roulette, right? If for any reason you're unfamiliar with the game, you take a gun, empty the chamber and all of the bullets, put in one round, spin the cylinder, point it at your head, and pull the trigger. It's basically a game of chance where if you lose, you die. John goes first, places the gun against his head, pulls the trigger, and the gun fires. Bad luck, right? But when police investigate, they find that instead of having 0 bullets left in the gun, there are 7 left in the gun and 1 spent shell. The gun was fully loaded. Additionally, the gun had been wiped down, not even containing John's own fingerprints. A witness came forward and said that when he heard the shot, he rushed in and actually held John's hand as he died. At the time, an unnamed female Manson family member was standing in the room holding a gun. Despite the glaringly obvious that he was either shot by the woman holding the gun or the game was rigged, I guess the coroner and police were super busy that day because they ruled his death a suicide. Joel Pugh, 29 years old. Sandra Good's husband, who was also a member of the Manson family for a time. Though Sandra was a loyal follower, Manson spoke often of how much he hated Joel. Joel was found dead in a hotel in London, England on December 1, 1969, with his wrists and throat slit twice. At the time of his death, many members of the Manson family had already been arrested for the Tate LaBianca murders, except for follower Bruce Davis, who happened to be in London at the time that Joel died. However, his death was ruled a suicide, so no charges were ever pursued. Ronald Hughes, 35 years old. He was Leslie Van Houten's attorney, the same attorney who stood up to Manson and refused to let Leslie take the stand in Manson's defense. Manson was upfront about being pissed off at Hughes over this. In November of 1970, Ronald went on a camping trip during a 10-day recess from the trial and never returned. His body was found in March of 1971. His death was ruled a drowning. Not only had Manson said to him, quote, "I don't want to see you in this courtroom again," before they left for recess, But Sandra Good bragged that Hughes was a retaliation murder. Unfortunately, there was never any physical evidence to tie the Manson family to his death. James Willett, 26 years old. His body was found on November 8, 1972. He and his wife had been living with some members of the Manson family, including Priscilla Cooper, Lynette Frome, William Goucher, and James Craig. They were living in Stockton, California, committing various robberies together. Something went south because James had his vehicle stolen and was forced to dig his own grave before being shot and poorly buried. Side journey. I get that if someone's holding a gun on you, you're very likely to do whatever they tell you. It makes sense. I can see myself doing almost anything I'm told to do. But dig my own grave? Fuck you. I'm not going out doing manual labor. You're going to kill me anyways, so you do the lifting, you lazy sack of shit. Police found his station wagon at the home they were all sharing, where they also found the body of his wife, 19-year-old Lauren Willett, dead from a gunshot wound to the head and buried in the basement. Thankfully, their infant daughter was found alive. William Goucher pled guilty to the murder, and James Craig pled guilty to an accessory after the fact. Though committed by members of the Manson family, it was never linked to Manson since he was incarcerated and they could not find evidence of him instructing them to carry out the killings. Oh, and there's just one more thing. The attempted murder of President Gerald Ford. One of Manson's earliest and most devoted followers, Lynette "Squeaky" Frome, attempted to shoot Gerald Ford on September 5, 1975. Her gun had jammed and the Secret Service got their hands on her immediately. She was given 15 years in prison and was the first person to be sentenced under United States Code Title 18, which made it a federal crime to make an attempt on the life of a U.S. president. Many Manson family members remained loyal to him until the end, Squeaky being the most devoted. Prior to her arrest, any time Manson was moved to a different prison, she would pack up and move to wherever was nearest. After her arrest in December of 1987, she found out that he had cancer and actually escaped from prison in an attempt to reach him. She was released on parole in August of 2009. She is now 76 years old and lives with her boyfriend in Marcy, New York. She gave an interview in 2019 where she said, "Was I in love with Charlie? Yeah, I still am." I bet that made the boyfriend feel real special. The Beatles, however, were very vocal about renouncing Manson's twisted interpretation of their music and condemning the action of Charlie and his followers. Out of respect for the victims, the group never played Helter Skelter live again. Paul McCartney said that Helter Skelter was actually named after an amusement park ride, and the lyrics were meant to symbolize the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. My Roman Empire is Jonah Hill's entire performance as Sherman Schrader in Accepted. I hope you have hobo stab insurance. Guys, seriously, I don't want to be here alone when the walls start to bleed. It would be really cool if you didn't tell people I scream like that. Yeah, cool, let's start this fake college and then we can start a meth lab. I told you that in confidence, Hands. Honestly, that movie is a work of art from start to finish. Linda Kasabian was 20 years old at the time of the trials. She was granted immunity in exchange for her testifying against the family. She was their star witness. She spent 40 years in hiding after the trials due to fear of retaliation from the Manson family. She died in Tacoma on January 21, 2023. Susan Atkins was 21 years old at the time of her sentencing. While in prison, she abandoned her loyalty to Manson and became a born-again Christian. She took part in prison programs to support other women and received an accommodation for assisting in an emergency health intervention for another inmate who had attempted suicide. She married twice. Her second marriage in 1987 was to attorney James Whitehouse, a Harvard Law School graduate who was 15 years younger than she was. He represented her in her 2000 and 2005 parole hearings. Lawyer friends, isn't this a conflict of interest? Please advise. She was denied parole 17 times. She died of brain cancer in September of 2009. At the time of her death, she was the longest-serving female inmate in the California prison system. Patricia Krenwinkel was 23 years old at the time of her sentencing. During her time in prison, she earned a bachelor's degree in human services. Though initially staying loyal to Manson, she eventually renounced him and went on record saying that he was, quote, absolutely lying about not ordering the murders. She is now 76 years old. She has been denied parole 14 times, and following the death of Susan Atkins, is now the longest-serving female inmate in the California prison system. Tex Watson was 26 years old at the time of his sentencing. He also converted to Christianity in prison. He was married in 1979 and through conjugal visits was able to father 4 children. He became an ordained minister in 1981 and received a bachelor's degree in business management. His wife filed for divorce in 2003, but the two reportedly remain friends. He has been denied parole 18 times and is still incarcerated. Leslie Van Houten was the youngest, just 19 years old at the time of her sentencing. She also distanced herself from Manson after working with a social worker. She earned a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in philosophy while in prison. She was denied parole more than 20 times before being released from prison at the age of 73 in July of 2023. Many spoke out about the parole request, stating that these inmates would forever pose a threat to society. Most notably were former Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger and current Governor Gavin Newsom. Sharon Tate's mother Doris and her sister Deborah have been extremely vocal. They signed multiple petitions to keep the Manson family imprisoned, which garnered millions of signatures. They were also instrumental in getting legislation passed that eliminated conjugal visits for prisoners serving life sentences in California because of Tex Watson. Charles Manson and the Manson family are a staple in pop culture. There are countless documentaries, movies about or inspired by their crimes, books, and even music. It's pretty safe to say that the stain they left on the world is something that will never be washed away. Manson was denied parole 12 times. He died on November 19, 2017. Happy fucking birthday to me. After his death, it took 4 months to settle who would receive his remains. There were 4 people contending for them. 2 people who claimed to be his children, 1 who claimed to be his grandchild, and 1 who was his pen pal? Like, what? Who invited you into the chat? The remains were awarded to his grandchild, who had his body cremated and scattered his ashes in an undisclosed location. After being bought and sold many times throughout the years, including being rented to Nine Inch Nails frontman Trent Reznor in 1992, the home at 10050 Cielo Drive was demolished in 1994. An 18,000 square foot home was built in its place. It was put up for sale for a cool $70 million in June of 2022. And that is the case of Charles Manson, which is undoubtedly way too fucking much Manson. I am gonna go eat some ice cream and watch Paul Blart Mall Cop to come down. That's all I have for you today, my guys, gals, and non-binary pals. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode, like next week when we take a look into the case of a woman who was brutally murdered over leggings. If you don't mind, please make sure to drop a 5-star wherever you're listening. It really helps the podcast. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Criminally Nerdy Podcast, Twitter, X, whatever you call it, at Crime Nerd Pod, or shoot me an email anytime at criminallynerdypodcast@gmail.com. Till next time, keep it nerdy. Don't like that. Texas? Shit. La 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 la. Krampus. Mansion. $1 million. One more time. Burger. Oh my god. Linden. Fuck. Shit. Okay. Really? Why do I do that? That's normal. Motherfucker. Starting strong. Already. Kudos.